Okay, so now we're looking at dma050 and we're looking at section 8. Section 8 is the one that's not in your Leap Log workbook. It is the one on graphing inequalities. Now, when you have an inequality, that just simply means you have a less than, a greater than, a less than and equal, or greater than and equal to sign in the equation. So you might have, let's say, y is greater than 2x plus 1. You might have 3x minus 2y is less than 12. So if you have a problem where you're working with an inequality, we still ultimately are going to work the problem and solve it and get it in the form of y equals mx plus b. This one is already in that format, so I need to make no change to this equation. It's already in the correct format for y equals mx plus b. When I look at the equation on the right, what I want to do is I'm going to bring down my negative 2y. Remember, when you move this across the equals, it's going to become a negative 3x, and then I just bring down my plus 12. As a review from DMA 40, if you divide by a negative, which I have to do here, if you divide by a negative in the last step, you have to remember to flip that inequality sign in the other direction. Negative over negative is a positive 3/2 x. Positive and a negative makes that a minus 6. Now that I have it in this form, then I would be able to use this. But let's make note here, if you divide by a negative in last step, you flip your inequality sign to the other direction. So that's the one little piece we want to be sure that we remember to do, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some calculator information and some computer information. So I'm going to give you some notes on each part of that. What I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with to graph on the computer. To graph on the computer, when we have an inequality, if you have greater than or if you have less than, you're going to use a dashed line. So we have to choose, is our line going to be dashed or is it going to be solid? If we have greater than and equal, or if we have less than with the equal, we're going to use a solid line. So right now, in other words, what we do is we choose the line tool on the computer, and then I'll show you in a few moments. After you find the line tool, there's another place where you have a solid or you have dashed, and you have to make the decision, is it solid or is it dashed? After you know those two things, you're going to use, my drawing's not that great, but this is a paint bucket. You're going to use the paint bucket, it's a little tool, to shade the graph. So let me just demonstrate for a moment so you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, here I am. I'm looking at a graphing screen. I'm going to make it a little bigger here. So you would choose your line tool. That's where your line tool is. This is where I'm talking about for solid or for dashed. If my inequality does not have an equals, I'd make it dashed. I would choose my 2 points. This picture here is the paint bucket, and then I would have to shade either above or below depending on which side needed to be shaded. If I made a mistake, just either hit delete or clear. It'll clear everything out and you can start over. So again, line tool, it might need to be solid, and it could be that maybe I needed to shade up here. Okay, so those are the features that we're using here when you're graphing. It's just like before where you just did a solid straight line, but the only difference is solid or dashed, and then you use the paint bucket to shade. So that's the only twist on the computer that you have to do different. You're not seeing that now? Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, so as I'm saying, if you're graphing, you're going to choose, let me make it bigger so you can see it again. This is your line tool, and before we would normally just pick 2 points. This is the location where it's either solid or it's dashed. So if there's no equals, we would choose dashed. We would graph our 2 points, choose the paint bucket, and then shade. Just press clear to clear everything out. Again, line tool, let's say you meant to have it solid. Graph your 2 points, choose the paint bucket, and then shade. So here on the computer screen, on your computer screen when you're graphing, that's all you're going to do. Line tool, solid if there's an equals, dashed if there's no equals, and then after you've graphed your 2 points, you shade it. The way you get your points is the same way that we would have done it before. So let me give you an equation. Let me go to a new screen here. Hang on. So if we have the equation, let's say y is than 2x plus 4. If I need to graph this inequality, on your calculator, you're going to move your cursor before the y1 equals. Mark where that location would be. You'll see I've got that in yellow. So normally on your calculator, you would see y1 equals. You're going to move your cursor here. When you move it to this location, if your symbol is greater than, it's greater than and equal. As long as it's greater than, you're going to use a shape that's going to look like this. If your inequality is less than, or if it's less than and equals, you're going to use a shape that looks like this. After you have that keyed in, then again, this is still on the calculator, you're going to press the button graph, and you might have to choose zoom 6 if it's not at the standard view in order to view it. That's at it. Remember to get your ordered pairs that we learned in an earlier section in DMA50. We do second table to get our points to graph. You just have to be sure that the points fit on the size of the graph that you have. So for this one, I'm going to go to the calculator and put in 2x plus 4. So here at y equals 2x plus, you type in the equation just like you did with equals. Now notice I'm going to use my left arrow key, and I'm moving my cursor to the left, and it's going to go in front of y1. Do you notice how now it's blinking here? If you have the older calculator, like the big black thick calculator, if that's the one you're using, you press the enter key and it's going to make this shape change. For most of you who have the newer calculator, it's going to be just like what I'm going to show you here on my screen. So when yours is here and you press enter, you get a dialog box. There's no need to change the color. You're going to go down to where it has line. And then I'm going to go to the right. This is the one that I mean looks like greater than because it's open to the left. This is the one I would use for less than because it has the point to the left. It's like it's open to the right. On my equation, I have greater than. So I want to come here and I need to go back to the other one. That's the greater than. Arrow down to OK and press enter. The next, and you'll see it's changed. It's not the slash. It looks like a greater than sign. I'm going to press graph to view it. And if you're not sure if you were at the standard view or not, you would do zoom and then 6. This one is at standard view, but if you're not, you would do zoom 6. Now, before we just had a straight line that would show up. Now, do you see it's already shaded? So it's telling you where to shade. So all I need to do is get 2 points. So I'm going to do second table. And if I were doing my test, I would write down the 2 points I was graphing. So let's say I'm going to graph -2, 0, and 0, 4. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to choose the line tool. My inequality did not have an equals, so I'm going to use the dashed line. I'm going to do -2, 0, 0, 4. And then as you noticed on the graph here, if I look back at the graph, it's shaded above to the left. Then here, I'm going to shade above to the left. And then I would save and then check. Now, that's not the same problem for this one. I was just using the graph to do an example. But that's all that you have to do when you're using your calculator is change your setting here, and you're going to make it either greater than or less than, graph to view it, and second table to get your points. So it's just like the other sections, solve for y equals mx plus b, plug it in on y equals, and then you've got the information that you need on that. Then in section 9, we've already about functions. When we talked about section 15, 16, so we already have talked about functions a bit. All they're going to do here in this section is bring this up again. Y equals mx plus b, that is our slope equation, but if we write it as f of x equals mx plus b, what happens is when we have an equation such as f of 3 equals plus 4, what I can do is when I solve this and I do 2 times 3 plus 4, that would give me 6 plus 4, which then in essence f of 3 is equal to 10. So if I needed to graph a point, my ordered pair would be 3 is my x, 10 is my y. So when you're working in section 9 and you're given a function, you're still just being given an equation. They're just having you plug in the values. So let me give you another example. Let's say you have g of x equals 1/3 x plus 2. And they want you to solve for g0, and they want you to solve for g of -3. So that means I'm going to do 1/3 times 0 plus 2. Well, 1/3 times 0 is nothing. Add 2 to it. G of 0 is 2. So if they wanted the ordered pair, I could give them 0, 2. If they want g of -3, I'd have 1/3 times -3 plus 2. This being multiplied gives me -1 plus 2. And -1 plus 2 is going to give me a +1. So my ordered pair here would be -3 and +1. Because remember, this part here, g of x, means y equals. So in other words, when I plug in g of 0, my y is equal to 2. And then my x is the value that's in the parenthesis where the x is. Same thing here. This means y equals. The value inside is the x. So my y is a 1, my x is a -3. So in section 9, that's all they're doing is they're just coming back and they're giving you some equations like you've already worked with, but they're giving you a value to plug in, and then they may ask you to write it in the form of an ordered pair. Okay?